Today I want to talk about cinematic movement in films and why I think every shot should have movement. This is my own personal theory. So before you say, no, you don't know what you're talking about, what about unmotivated camera movement, blah, 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 please hear me out. So when I say that every single shot should have movement in it, what exactly am I talking about? I guess the first one that I'll talk about is the movement of the characters within the frame. There's action within the frame. That's the blocking. That is the thing that is happening that's interesting to the viewer. You unfold your story in different ways. Through blocking, you can have your actors in a wide shot, in a medium shot, in a close-up. You can get an extreme close-up, depending on your blocking. That blocking is an important part of adding movement within the frame. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you can add movement within the frame. Wind, rain, things blowing around, leaves, that's all environmental type of movement. You can have crowds moving around. Say you have a character that is still, he doesn't feel connected to the world, he doesn't feel part of the action. You could have that person still within the frame and have everything around him moving around. That contrast is an important part of explaining who that character is. So movement, blocking within the frame is our first type of movement. The second type of movement is moving the camera around within the space. Having the camera move organically within panning around, revealing new parts of the background that speak to who this person is. All of that goes into our second type of movement. So the first one is movement within the frame. The second one is the frame moving around in the space. Now this could just be to follow a character. It could be that the character did something or looked somewhere and the camera is motivated to turn that way. It could be a wandering aspect of the camera. It could be that the camera swings around to reveal different content that you weren't sure about. Having that camera movement to reveal different aspects of the entire space is something that we can use as directors and cinematographers. Having that frame move around in the world and the camera physically move around the world is our second type of movement. So what about our third type of movement? Now, the third type of movement to me is extremely important, and that is the emotional movement of a shot. Now, you can have emotional movement in a scene or in a shot, even if the camera's moving, even if the characters are moving within the frame. But sometimes we want to have a frame that's just still. Like say, like our earlier instance where everything was moving in the film, within the frame, and the frame was moving around in the world. There's all this motion. And then we suddenly contrast that motion with a frame that is still. A frame that really just pulls in on someone's face and then it stays there an extra beat, or really maybe even an uncomfortable amount of time. Now this tells us that there is a point here that's really important, a point that we should pay attention to. That contrast is there. Just like what I was talking about earlier, where you had a character that was still within the frame, and the frame was still, and the environment, everyone around them was moving around. That's a contrast within a frame. But what about a contrast within, over time, a temporal contrast? So we're in a movie, the camera's moving around, the the size of the character is moving around, they're moving within the frame. There's all this action always going on, and then suddenly stillness, like something happens, and then there's stillness. So that third type of movement is emotional movement. So that's what I talk about when I think every shot should have movement. If your frame is still, if there's no movement within that frame, then the only thing that's left for you to contrast that with is something emotional moving within your story. So if your camera is motionless, if it's still, if there isn't any action within the frame and the frame has no action, no movement within the world, and everything's static, there needs to be, in my opinion, something within the frame that contrasts the rest of the film, that has that temporal contrast that tells us, hey, this is a moment that we need to pay attention. So to review, we have three types of movement. We have movement within the frame, that is your blocking, that is the environment, that is everything that goes on within the frame. Foreground objects, background objects, all of that go into the entire composition of the image. The second type of movement is the camera moving, the frame moving within space. It's moving around the space, following our character as they're speaking. It's framing them farther away or closer. It is a part of telling the story. And the third is that emotional aspect. So if you have your camera still, to me, my belief is that moment should be emotional. That moment should have a serious emotional purpose. So how do we do this in practice? You make choices. You choose how you're going to tell the story. Yes, you can have unmotivated camera movements, and I think that's just as valid as having a camera that's still for no reason. I think that it's pretty much been proven that if you watch a Hollywood movie, that shots have movement in them because these are motion pictures. Now, ideally, you would have movement that is motivated. So to get movement that's motivated, you don't just have to look at the scene and go, well, there's nothing right here that's motivating the movement of the camera. Well, that means that you haven't thought the scene out well enough to really explore everything that you can do within that shot. You need, as a director, as a cinematographer, and even as a writer, you need to choose what it is that the camera's doing. You need to choose telling a story. You need to choose the story so that it can be told in a cinematic way. And to me, that means movement. Movement of the characters in the frame, movement of the camera, and movement of the emotional story. It's your choice. It's your film. Add movement, add emotion, add what you need to do to tell an effective story. I love you all, and I hope to see you in the comments.